All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. The conversation continues. We're still talking about the floods crisis. This is your chance to ask your questions. If you live in Nairobi, at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. And Simi, you had a lot to respond to. Yeah. But now you started talking about the response part. First of all, do you have enough to deal with these issues? Is it a policy issue? Is it lack of goodwill? What is it? I think, Trevor, let me start by saying that if there's an administration that has taken the issue of disaster management seriously, perhaps more than even any other administration, is this administration. Just to give you perspective, for a long time, fire and rescue was a unit in other dockets. It's only in the past 3-4 years that this was escalated and elevated to become a fully fledged sector in an office no less than that of the Office of the Governor. Understanding that disaster management is a cross-cutting responsibility. It's not a one-off. You require humanitarian support, you need infrastructure responses, and so on and so forth. But having said that, over the past 1 year, a lot has happened in terms of strengthening this sector. I mentioned that one of the first things we did, we moved away from just being a response-oriented unit to understand that disaster management starts with mitigation and prevention. So we've actually set up a disaster risk reduction directorate. And I'm going to actually just shed light on the misinformation about the qualifications of my staff. We also have the fire and rescue services. We've also created what you call the training, innovations, and development, understanding that as a sector, we must leverage on evolving practices, best practices globally. Technology must be infused. Human resource must be strengthened. Equipment must be acquired. We must continuously ensure that as a sector, we are properly positioned to serve Nairobi, which, as Senator Eddie mentioned, is not just a normal county. This is actually the face of Kenya. 60–70% of the aspirations of not just the locals, but the international community are represented here. But allow me, Eddie, I don't know where my two colleagues got the information about the qualifications of the leadership of this sector. I have nothing wrong with having officers who have degrees in theology and in security, because disaster management cuts across many things. We have psychosocial support. How do you have people that are not grounded in some dogma or in some beliefs to empathize and work with those that have been affected? And I want to just mention to the senators that the past 3 days, the governor and I have been to no less than 10 low-income areas. Just yesterday, we were in Viwandani, and we went down to the Mashinani, places that nobody has accessed. In fact, to use the words of the residents, ata sonko hakukanyaga hapa, meaning we were able to see firsthand the impact of what has happened. We've been to Kiambio, we've been to Mathare North, we've been to Tali, we've been to Gatina. So we've practically visited all those places, those people that were on the rooftops. I have been personally part and parcel of my firefighting team rescuing them with the limited resources that we've had. Okay. So in terms of empathy, but allow me to say this. Allow me to say this, because you've cast aspersions on the quality and qualifications. Let me give you the correct picture of the qualification of the top leadership of the Fire and Rescue Services Directorate and the Disaster Risk Reduction. The Director of Fire and Risk Services has a diploma and a BSc in Disaster Management and a certificate in Fire Engineering and is doing an MA in Crisis Response and Disaster Management at the National Defense College. That is a top officer leading our fire and rescue. His deputy has a diploma and a BSc in Disaster Management, is a certified fire inspection auditor. The Assistant Director for Fire and Rescue Services Technical has a BSc in Disaster Management and a certificate in Fire Engineering. The Assistant Director in charge of Operations has 30 years experience in firefighting, and he has a certificate and diploma in Fire Engineering. The Assistant Director in Ambulance Services, which deals with the support services, has a master's in medical sociology and social work. He has a diploma in clinical medicine. Just to run, I don't want to go through the entire list. In disaster risk reduction, the current director has a master's in population studies and social studies. The deputy has a diploma in fire engineering and director of DRR, the one you talked about, criminology. And let me say that it's important to have studies in security studies, because particularly when dealing with fires, a lot of times because of insurance purposes, because of other requirements, investigations are part and parcel of a disaster management. Therefore, you need somebody properly grounded with a security background.
So let's just do two issues. Okay?
Yes,
so
yes.
There's a raft of the issues that we talked about. From prevention, disaster preparedness, response, mitigation, disaster recovery.
Yes.
So let's start from prevention.
Yes.
Just mention two things that you did to prevent this.
Okay. Let me say the first thing that we did, and I mentioned this, prevention starts with institutional reengineering. What has happened? We've moved away from being a reactive force to creating the disaster risk reduction, which has a clear directorate with a mandate, which has been devolved to the sub-counties. At the beginning of the El Nino rains, His Excellency Governor Sakaja and the regional commissioner convened a multi-agency, multi-sectoral committee.
And you're the chairman?
I am the chairman, which brings together... What did you do? We mapped out all the hotspots.
So you knew this was coming?
Well, you know...
Hotspots. Okay. So you've mapped out the hotspots.
Let me say this, Trevor. Disasters will always come, not if, but when.
Okay.
It's not bahati kubahatisha. We know that disasters will happen. So what happens is that when you created that multi-agency, multi-sectoral committee, each of the sectors was then given up the responsibility to come up with a sector-specific plan, which was cascaded to the sub-counties. So if it was public health, the community health workers were made clearly aware that one of the secondary hazards that would emerge because of floods would be waterborne diseases. What has happened? We were then
let's go step by step. We'll get into that. That is
that's prevention. I'm talking about prevention.
So prevention now.
Yes.
You've mapped out the hotspots.
Yes.
Okay. And
yes. So we've mapped out the hotspots. We've isolated what the threats are in each of the areas. So if you look at the topography of Nairobi, and I hope that Senator can give us the same magnanimity in terms of sometimes acts of nature. The Nairobi's topography is more like Narok's. Nairobi sits in a basin. We have the three major rivers emanating from the highlands, all snaking through the various parts and getting into the lowlands of Eastlands and getting into the Athi River. So it's inevitable that these current floods, which are a result not because of poor drainage, but because of bursting of banks of the rivers, because of heavier than usual rain. And what has happened is that this has affected areas along those areas. So from a prevention perspective, what were we doing? Sensitization of the communities on the dangers, understanding that they will be displaced, putting in place temporary holding centers, beefing up on the stockpiles that Senator talked about in terms of food and non-food support, which, just for your information, we've been distributing over the past 3 days. Also working with the national government officers to continuously engage with the community, to set up what we call community response teams, to become first in line in terms of response. And I must salute many of the volunteers who are actually at the forefront of responding in the dead of the night, even before we go to the scene. And these are the people, that was not by accident. All these have been part and parcel of the county government's disaster management strategy.
So if you had holding camps mapped out, why were people still sleeping on top of roofs?
Well, Trevor, you know, when it starts raining and you're in a flood, you don't jump from your house to a camp. You have to be moved from that camp. Trevor, sorry. But let me say this.
Sorry, did you tell them that, okay, fine, this flood is coming?
Yes.
What you do is the moment it hits you, this is where you go. Did they know? Because otherwise they wouldn't sleep on
Listen, Trevor, you know, disaster is not an exact science where it gives you adequate warning to move from your house when it hits. Remember, the effects of flooding are not sometimes because of the rain where you are.
Yeah.
It's because of the rain upstream.
I'll give you a chance.
That's why Kamulu area in itself may not be witnessing rain, but it's flooded. Because when the water hits you, you have very little lead time to mobilize yourself. You may not be at home, or you may be at work. You're in different states of preparedness. You are asleep at night. And like I said, these rains are, you know, when the floods hit you in the different parts of Nairobi, it's not the same exact pattern, right? It's not an exact science.
Okay, let's hear Mutinda, then I'll come to Eddie.
But I would love to address the other issues that you talked about.
One at a time, yes. Mutinda.
Okay, I don't want to dwell so much into the qualifications, but Senator, and then with my colleague, then we will embark on it, because we have the facts. But quickly, just on the same, I just wanted to ask Simiyu, what is the qualification of the principal fire officer?
You know, let me say this. The fire and rescue department has 370 officers.
I'm saying the principal fire officer, the principal. So
you know, I don't have one principal fire officer.
Okay.
So if you want one of the principal fire officers,
okay,
I can get you. But I have different principal fire officers.
Yes. No problem.
But allow me to say this, because the integrity, the integrity and the trust of Nairobians in the disaster management sector rests on the information that they get.
Okay.
And I want to repeat this for the avoidance of doubt, that this sector has one of the most highly qualified and well-trained locally and international officers.
That's fine. Training.
And I say,
Trevor, I'm becoming very impatient.
Yes.
And I never want to get impatient with an officer like him, because I would be impatient with Sakaja.
Yes.
If the governor was here, next time, Sakaja, please, Trevor, when you're calling me to this show from the Senate, I beg that call Sakaja.
Have you been able to?
There's a reason, because Sakaja does not come to Senate.
Okay.
Whenever we summon him to come to Senate, he just disregards the Senate, and he doesn't want to come to the Senate. And next time, bring him here, because this kind of conversation is honestly very embarrassing for Kenyans. If you can come here as an officer, and I don't blame it on you, my friend, because you know, you're a young man like me. If I ask you, when were you employed as a chief officer?
I don't know how that is material to this conversation.
It is material.
And I think, no, Trevor.
Substance.
I was up, you know, it's like me asking.
When you were speaking,
yes.
I was listening.
Yes.
And you're not going to cut me when I'm speaking, because it's a very serious issue of national importance. The reason why I'm asking when he was employed as a chief officer is because I agree with him that disasters will continue happening. But the reason why we have got this docket is so that you can preempt, you can predict, and start preparing for those disasters before they happen. There's nobody in this country who wants that when the disaster happens, then the government's response just right on time when it is happening is when you start thinking about what is the strategy I'm going to put in place to respond to my fire problems, what is the strategy I'm going to do to deal with this flood. That escalation engagement only happens where there is no government in place. Where there's government in place, there needs to be preparedness. And the reason why I'm saying there needs to be preparedness and readiness, and I don't see it, and I'm feeling embarrassed that you're going to tell us the names of people who are qualified, which even makes this issue worse. Because if you're telling us that all these people who are qualified could not be able to put together a proper response strategy before this disaster affected the people, that's a problem. I need you to tell us what I was expecting in this conversation, and I expect it from Sakaja, less you and more Sakaja, is what was the potential impact of these floods in Nairobi, given our strategic planning and anticipation of it? And in that potential impact of it in terms of loss of lives, loss of property, what have we mitigated that we have made sure that this was what we predicted, this is what we mitigated? Because as we're speaking right now, in Nairobi alone, the impact of these floods in the countrywide we have had, the real number now is 179 deaths. 160 of these are in Nairobi. Okay? Then if you look at the displacement of people during these floods in Nairobi alone, we have got 200,000 families that have been displaced in Nairobi. 200,000 families, Trevor.
He disagrees.
We are talking. He might have a different number, but I also have 60,000. Actually, 60,000 is the number of property that has been destroyed in terms of economic property. Stores za mama, you know, duka za hustlers. The property that has been destroyed in Nairobi is what is 60,000. It's not the families that have been displaced. In terms of livelihood, Trevor, because these families that have been displaced, they are averaging 5 to 10 members of the families. In terms of livelihood that have been lost in Nairobi, it is 1 million people who have lost livelihood. We haven't talked about dilapidated infrastructure that has got economic impact in terms of the money that has been lost in the economy, in terms of the time that has been wasted in the economy. And then, Trevor, I was expecting the chief officer to tell me even the socio-economic vulnerabilities that this has resulted to. The kind of crime that has come in the place where people are taking advantage of redistributive justice in the course of this disaster, the kind of divorce that we are seeing in Nairobi, the kind of delayed schooling for our children? How many children are out of school as a result of this disaster? So if you come here and start parading to me the number of officers that you have that are qualified, and the impact is affecting almost now 2 million lives, I have a serious problem, which I don't think I can have a conversation with him, honestly, without of respect, figures, because that is about about Sakaja, because if parading these qualified people do not help us if they do not mitigate this kind of problem.
Bramwell doesn't handle the human resource issue, but the numbers.
Trevor, and I think sensationalism and throwing around figures without a basis is one of the biggest tragedies you have in this town. I'm starting by saying that disaster management is a multi-sectoral, cross-cutting phenomenon.
How many people died in Nairobi?
In Nairobi, listen, Eddie, allow me to answer. First and foremost, not more than 12,600, between 12,000 to 3,000 households have been affected.
Okay.
Start from there. There's a current initiative by the national government to create the 30-meter, 30-meter boundary as part of the long-term mitigation to get people to move away from the riverine systems. This, as of yesterday in the meeting at the office of the president, an initiative led by the housing sector. There's a multi-sectoral, multi-agency team that has been put together by the president that has been meeting every day. The units that are being displaced are not less, about 8,000, which are being cleared as we speak. In Nairobi, the households that have been mapped by the Red Cross, by World Vision, by ourselves, the number of impacted people are about 60,000, right, by these rains. And remember, disaster management, they are experts. You're not an expert, perhaps, but they are experts that are working on this. And when you talk about even putting there the humanitarian support, it's calculated. It has been put together based on the numbers, not on figures thrown around on social media. That's number one. Number two, and with all tremendous respect to Eddie, because he's been my friend for a long time, I sit here as a disaster management officer because I was interviewed and found fit to serve. It's not fair for you to ask the governor to come here to talk about a subject matter that I do on a day-to-day basis. If you're talking about best practices in disaster management, there are short-term measures. Let's talk about that. There are long-term measures. If you want us to enter into a discussion on what is our strategy, I'm happy to share. We are working on a disaster management policy, strategy, and coming up with a new framework that will strengthen the capacity of the county government to be able to respond. We've been in office for 1.5 years, and you are clear about the challenges you are facing. So going forward, that's what you're working on. And it's not lost on you, Senator, that even the national government realized that as a country, we need to up our game when it comes to disaster management. That's why the Parliament passed the National Disaster Management Authority bill about 2 or 3 weeks ago, in cognition that the 3 things that you need to address when it comes to disaster management, because it's about, first and foremost, what is the leadership structure when you're responding to this disaster in Nairobi. We have the military involved, we have the Red Cross involved, we have Nairobi County involved, we have the National Police. How do you create a confluence or a structure that brings all these people, the National Defense, National Disaster Operations Center? How do you bring all the different stakeholders involved in the mitigation you talk about, in the prevention, in the response and the recovery, including the roads and housing? How do you create a framework that allows us to address this issue of disaster? Number 2, how do you have what you call disaster coordination and command? So that when we are hit by the floods at night, we have a unified structure that says Nairobi County Fire Brigade, go to Mathare. Nairobi National Police Service, go to Tali. At the moment, you don't have that. So you'll find everybody addressing one area, all of us deploying resources because we don't have a unified structure. That is what the current initiative, and we have a bill that has passed, a cabinet paper that has been approved. It's going to the county assembly so that we have a proper legal and regulatory framework to govern disaster management in this country. Number 3, the issue of disaster funding and financing. It's easy to say that, we gave counties are supposed to do 2% of, their budget. They set aside this amount and that amount. But remember, when you're accessing money using the current legal framework, the PFMA Act, that says you can only do, procurement is done on 1, 2, 3, 4. It denies disaster response the flexibility, the agility to be able to procure things as and when they need to do that. And I say that personally because as a sector, We've had challenges even just procuring fuel because it becomes an audit issue, right? Particularly in a disaster. Remember, disasters are never predictable in terms of scale and extent. So it's easy for you to throw stones at somebody, behaving as if it's Governor Sakaja, who invented, innovated, and invited floods upon us. These are natural phenomena. But as I finish, remember, from a disaster management perspective, we need to isolate response to man-made disasters, fires, terrorism activities, road accidents, vis-a-vis responding to a natural disaster. A natural disaster is unpredictable. That's why even countries that are well-developed, whenever disasters hit, there's human loss, there's infrastructure loss, there's damage to public health consequences. Look at Japan when earthquakes hit. Look at Philippines when typhoons hit. Look at even the Arab nations where we've also witnessed the same phenomena. So it is not fair to stand up and say that you apportion blame to one leader and say that that's the person responsible for the loss of 1 million livelihoods in Nairobi, for the damage to the infrastructure caused by an act of God. If you look at our history, Trevor, if there's a moment when Kenyans come together across party lines, religious lines, class lines, is in moments of disaster. This is a moment when you should be having sober conversations on what is it that you should be educating members of the public. Because I believe that my two colleagues are members of Nairobi. I mean, they're also residents of this county. What is it that we need to do to close ranks? And I'm happy when I see leaders all coming together to want to support. I know that the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga has a program tomorrow. I know that the Deputy President had a program. We've seen different stakeholders. How I wish that as a county government of Nairobi, we were given the opportunity for all these stakeholders to say, please come and let's consolidate all the things that we have so that we are able to respond together. Because you're in a response stage. Okay. You're not in a blame game stage to say who's responsible for what. Okay. We must be able to put all our efforts together at this moment in time across the political class to be able to inspire confidence to the members of the public that we may not have it right 100%, but this is what we need to do in terms of alleviating your problems now. Yeah. Let us have an opportunity to do an inquiry, an inquest down the stream, to then say, where did we go wrong? Okay.
Mutinda, there's something interesting that you raised, and you're in the finance committee. Yes. How are you helping the disaster department to respond quicker? Because it says even a simple thing like buying fuel when there's a disaster becomes an audit query.
Thank you. And you know, Trevor, this morning, as a Nairobian and as a Nairobi delegate, I've been very patient and keen to allow Mr. Simiyu to give out the information because he's the one in charge, From where we sit, let me start on that part of the procurement issue and tell Mr. Simiyu that PFM Act 110(2) says the purpose of an emergency fund is to enable payments to be made in respect of a county when an urgent and an unforeseen need for expenditure for which there is no specific legislative authorities arises. That is why it is called an emergency fund. It is different from a bursary fund, from mortgage fund, and all those funds the counties do have. This is a very special fund that is for unforeseen emergencies. So they have a leeway. It is different the way it's handled. Ours, when we are actually auditing it, is just to confirm did this particular expenditure and what was the authentication in terms of the paperwork, the receipts, and all those kind of things. So they have room, and that's why it is called an emergency. So there's no excuse, because we all agree you cannot know when an emergency is coming. But what is key, again, is on the subject of when he says that the basic that they did, the first thing in terms of prevention, was to sit down and put to counter in terms of setting places where people, in case of this occurrence, then people can be rescued to these centers and things like that. But now the question is then, if you've seen and you have the information from the meteorological department, which they brought it out, that this is going to happen, and if we had truly set out these particular places, what should have happened is that these people should have moved a day, a 24-hour timeline before this happens. They should have been moved, and that is where now they should have been, or they should be. But it happening after that this has happened is different. And you see, it is very key when we talk about qualifications, because it is in those particular qualifications then people are able to put their expertise to be able to put the right measures. I agree with Mr. Simiyu. He came the other day with the governor. And for him, I can see the effort he's trying to put. I've seen him go around, because we are in this Nairobi, I've seen them go around. But Mr. Simiyu, at times we cannot be 100% perfect. There are areas that we can give a credit of 80, and this 20%, we need to call a spade a spade. And that is why from the beginning I said this disaster, this issue of flood, is not a political issue. It's an all-Kenyan issue. But because we've narrowed it to Nairobi, we have to say it as it is. He has not answered in terms of the funds that I've talked about. The county of Mombasa and the county of Nairobi, they have not adhered to the conditions that have been put by the grants from FLOCA to date, and those funds are pending from National Treasury. Money is there for Nairobians, but it cannot be able to move because they've not been able to meet the specifics and the conditions. And I said, someone is sleeping on their job, especially, apart from the executive, especially also the person now, the CEC, because we don't have a CEC for climate change, but I think we have the CEC for environment, who at least should be able to be in charge within, because it still matters, climate. And that agreement has not been able to be executed. Why do we have funds lying at National Treasury for Nairobi County when someone is not doing whatever they're supposed to do? So as far as Nairobi County, those are some of the issues that we are saying. And yes, the other day, the governor called all Nairobi leaders, all. And one thing that I appreciate is that they came out and agreed that people who are in riparian land should not be allowed now to be there any longer, because we do not want to lose more lives for Kenyans. The previous government that was there, because of corruption, they gave titles to people in the riparian land. And that is why we have the problems that we have today. We have a place, I think, in Syokimau area, where we have a confusion today as we speak of who is the owner of this particular apartment that people bought, but they're supposed to move because the way the land is riparian, but the land was able to move from one person to the other, and now the current owners are the owners of the houses, the people who are now living in. Now, going back, who do we blame? So, in short, that agreement was good as far as Nairobi is concerned, but calling a spade is that the money that Nairobi has been given is not really being utilized to the extent that it needs to be utilized, especially now narrowing it to the issues of emergency that we are seeing. Now, there are issues that... Has that
money been received?
Of course, that money has been received, of course. And the money that I've even specified, the FLOCA money, has not been received. It is lying at National Treasury. And simply because someone has not been able to execute what they're supposed to execute, to be able to ensure that they receive it. So if you cannot even focus on receiving money, that is yours, that is your own, that you're supposed to receive, and other countries have been able to receive, then even how do you prioritize running around and saying that we are going to put measure A, B, and C? And when we come out with this information as far as human resources is concerned, we know what we are doing. And it's because we are concerned, because this is where we are. Trevor, this is where you live. You are in this particular city, up and including the whole team here. We are in this city, so everybody's concerned. Right now we are here. We don't know in the next 1 hour when we are leaving the studio how the roads will be. We might be stuck. Okay. So these are very critical issues. Yeah. And I want to agree with all of us, because one common agreement is that this is not a political issue. This is a governance current issue, the way it is, and we have to call a spade. But on the other hand, I had my brother say that the deputy president having budgets, again, for emergency and all that. Let me tell you, my colleague, Senator Eddie, the deputy president, from where he sits, and this being a national issue, he's come out to assist and to help the people who have been affected. Through the Ministry of ASAL, led by Honorable Penina, the food that comes from there, they've been able to go and assist in giving up, in ensuring, from where he sits, the deputy president, in ensuring that all these departments have been able to offer services and responses to the affected people. There's nothing wrong with that. We've seen the First Lady coming out, and many leaders have come out. Have you even seen members of parliament asking for support from also other members of parliament to support the tragedy that happened in Kijabe, Mai Mahiu the other day. And we are coming in to support because those are Kenyans. It's not about it's a Kenya Kwanza issue or an Azimio. This is not about that completely. And we've seen the KDF have responded. We also have the national multi-agency response that is in place, that is truly working from the office of the president, bringing in all the other stakeholders so that we are able to achieve a common response. We have relatives all over this country. So it's not just a Nairobi issue alone, but it's a Kenyan issue, and the national government has come in fully to be able to see how to support. I applaud Red Cross. But remember, Red Cross is under the national government. It's part of it. It's not like a different entity that now this is just Red Cross. It's under the national government. NCPB, we've seen that people are supposed to collect foods from NCPB, and there's a lot of positive coordination. I'm very proud. It has not been turned political, to be very honest. Kenyans are getting help from all over, and it is very positive.
Eddie.
I don't want to rebut my sister Tabitha on this, because as keen as I am, I'm also not keen to make this thing political. But what I'm trying to say, Tabitha, is that if you take time to look at laws and policies that are supposed to institutionalized, and Simi was talking about institutionalization of disaster readiness, response, prevention, mitigation, and recovery processes. That is something that must happen within laws and policies that are well castigated from a national level, going to what is the roles of counties in this element, and what because as I said, disaster is like war. In the course of disaster, what is the coordination mechanism that the national government and the county governments must have, and who is playing what roles?
Absolutely.
Right? Despite the fact that we've got emergency funds that are cascaded to particular counties, disasters that come into this format sometimes are capturing the entire country. And what I was questioning, and I stand firm about, is that every laws that have attempted to solve that legal question and policy equation have been squashed in parliament, and senior parliamentarians will tell you, just go and check in the entire parliament, they have been squashed because people in this country, and I'm not pointing out at the president or the deputy president, every single people in position of power in this country do not want that proper law to be in place because they want to control disaster management budgets. Because where disaster hasn't happened, people want to be able to consume that money. That's just a fact. That if it happens, it affects the office of the OP, that's fine. If it happens in the office of the deputy president, that is fine. If it affects my governor's office in Migori, that is fine. But it is something that you and I as lawmakers must be able to stand our feet down and solve. So that I just rest that there. But then to Simiu, my reason for saying that it is tough on you, and Simiu is a very brilliant young man. I suspect that probably went to Friends from Musinga where I went.
Was in Lenana. I went to the school called Lenana.
Now I see the desperation to protect Sakaja.
No. Nothing to do with that. It's a fine school.
This is the thing. You see, Simiu, as a chief officer, you are a technical person. But you also challenge morally on how do you question your boss where it needs to be questioned. That's the context with which I say that I'm not throwing any aspersion in terms of his qualification or his technical capabilities of responding to these problems. Because, like right now, Simiu has just talked about the issue that, for us to get these disaster funds and be able to use it, we are fearing we will be audited and the audit queries will come, and it makes it difficult for us to do 1+. The emergency fund that is established under the PFM Act, Trevor, stipulates that and portends a situation whereby the county will be able to have on-source revenue and be able to get revenue from the national government in terms of the equitable share, have that total amount of money put in CRF,
grants,
and after being put in CRF, add another grants like FLOCA, which is a specific amount of money given by the Danish embassy to be able to respond to this kind of climatic changes in the environment, have all that money, and then as a chief officer, because I'm sure he sits in the cabinet of the county, then they're able to take 2% of that entire collective, set it aside to be able to use it in terms of emergency. Now, emergency, when it happens, it needs a response. But disaster readiness, preparedness, and prevention is not an emergency equation. It is a planning equation and a strategic engagement that needs to, and ought to happen before disaster happens. You see why I have a problem? And that vision does not lie with Simiyu. And I cannot blame him for him.
Yeah.
That vision lies with the man who is given the CEO power in the county under Article 179 of the Constitution, called the governor. Which is why I was calling to question the idea that why don't we have these resources in place? Because if you've got 2% of this amount totally, total amount in CRF that's supposed to come to emergency response in Nairobi, which is how you should be able to empower Simiyu, that comes to about 824 billion for Nairobi. Where is that money? And even if it doesn't come entirely because of some delays in disbursement from national government, because sometimes I do understand that counties have got some delays in terms of money coming to the county, in terms of the equitable share. What has come in the past 6 months, 7 months, 12 months? What is it that has come to Nairobi, and how much has been set aside? You see, that's the question I need to have with the executive, and perhaps Simiyu can, and even Simiyu cannot answer to that, because the CEC Finance should be able to tell us that for the last 1 year, Nairobi has received this kind of equitable share. In our emergency fund, yes, we are supposed to have 824 million, but because of this share that we have received and because of this source revenue that we have had in the last 1 year, we have only been able to gather 300 million. And this 300 million, our potential for responding to this kind of emergencies needs 500 million. Therefore, we have had a shortfall of 200 million. That's the conversation.
But
because when you talk about the equipment...
Eddie, a quick one on the same. Simiyu has not complained of any insufficiency in terms of funds. From the beginning, if you are keen, they don't have that particular challenge.
I'll speak for myself.
Let him speak for himself.
So allow me to say this, Trevor.
Before I finish, because Simiyu talked about the issue of if they use this money prior, there will be audit queries. The emergency fund you're supposed to use is to exactly what emergency is. Audit queries comes once you have saved lives.
Okay. Thank you. So this is a good space to begin with, and I'm glad you say that there are deficiencies on our legal and regulatory framework governing disaster management. And indeed, even as Nairobi, we don't have an emergency fund per se.
You don't?
We do not. We have a vote. You know, a fund is governed. It has a fund. It has a fund management team. It has other aspects, and it's for that reason that we are reviewing our Disaster Management Act for 2016 right now. It does not provide for use of this fund in the manner and intent. And let me explain why. Our current access to that emergency vote is limited to food and non-food support. In an emergency like now, our county has, the county government has come up with a very clear response strategy. One is infrastructure focused. And there is a rapid program to restore about 17 bridges in the low-income areas. It means we must procure those things in the emergency circumstances. Does the current emergency vote we have provide for that? It doesn't. We need to intensify clearing of waterways and garbage that is in the ecosystem. Does that fund provide for it? It doesn't. I talked about fuel. Yeah. My current access to that fund, or that, let me use fund loosely, does not allow me to even expend a single shilling on fuel. Okay. That is why we are having this conversation at the county government
Senators, to review the fund you're talking about and the actual implementation.
Yes, This is why I'm telling you that there's a challenge.
And then number two, but
I want to help you.
Number two, listen, Eddie. That access to that 240 million that Senator has talked about right now limits me to buying blankets, buying mattresses, buying food.
According food and non-food.
According to the laws, the laws that you have at the county that have been customized. Yes.
Disaster and Emergency Fund Act.
And the PFMA Act of 2017 of the county. Yes.
Come to the county.
Yes.
Trevor, we don't want Kenyans to be misled.
No. I am not misleading. And I'd be happy to invite even my and listen. Let me say this. I'm talking about what I do. And I'm talking about the audit. As a matter of fact, I'm talking about the audit queries I have from the Senate right now, asking me to explain under what circumstances I procured.
Of Nairobi on disaster management and emergency issues.
Yes.
Which act is that?
2015.
What does it say
about
the usage of money in that?
It does not prescribe. That's why I'm saying that we are in the process of reviewing. And Eddie, I think you're the one who mentioned this. that there is a serious gap at the national level, and not even at the national level. We do not have an act that prescribes what I said, disaster financing. And then number two, I think what I need to say is this. Let us also separate the normal budget for emergency and disaster management in Nairobi and the emergency fund. We have a clear budget that has provided, for example, the construction of 2 new fire stations. We are doing a fire station in Gikomba and breaking ground in Kangemi, in addition of the 6 that currently exist. We are actually upscaling the Kangundo Road training school into a center of excellence to deal with the issues that you're talking about. How do we build capacity in the public? You're talking about how do you build capacity amongst even the firefighters. If I asked you, Eddie, where does a firefighter in Migori County go for training? We do not have such an agency in this country. And we're looking at addressing that gap because you know that the concern that you said about the professional competence of firefighters and you know, the disaster managementers in the country, we actually know there's a gap when it comes to emergency response, and you're addressing that. We're also looking at the aspect of the budget that I have. I'm supposed to buy PPEs, I need to buy fire engines, I need to essentially invest in the technology and equipment. So don't treat the disaster response in Nairobi as just driven by the emergency fund. Like I mentioned from the word go, we have a very clear plan as a sector.
That I support.
We have, and you're on that road.
I just want to hear from your own experience. So you've heard there's flooding in Mukuru.
Yes.
You just had that now.
No.
What does it take for you to respond? Are you saying that you can't access the funding?
No. Yeah. It has nothing to do with the funding. It has nothing to do with the funding. Response, we respond. Whenever there's a distress call, and we have an emergency line, a toll-free number 1508, that Nairobians call whenever there's a fire, there's a flooding problem, and response is not recovery.
So where do these audit queries come?
Sorry?
Where do the audit queries come from?
The audit queries will come in terms of what did you procure for a particular disaster, which is not supported by law. So I'll give you an example. Yeah. Right now, under my current framework, we need to construct these 17 bridges, right? I cannot use this money as it is to get the raw materials to pay for the contractor to do those bridges. Yet you know that these bridges must be in place by Monday because they are critical to children crossing over from Kiambio to Kwanjenga.
Okay.
You get me?
Okay.
So I think with the due respect, with the due respect to the senators, remember, response to disasters is never adequate. You can never budget enough.
Okay. It's okay.
Right? And we do what we can with that which we have. Okay. And let me also say this as I come to, maybe as I finish. This opportunity for Nairobi, traditionally, we've done very well in terms of responding to other forms of natural disasters, man-made disasters. But this flooding, and if the information that we have is to be understood, we understand that what is happening now is a phenomenon that happens every 50 years. The last time we had this flooding of this nature and extent was around 1955 and 57. We had a milder case around 2007. Now that you're getting it now, just to go back to what Eddie talked about, the current challenges you're facing with flooding are because of many other factors, but key to it is climate smart. The climate changes that you're witnessing. Of course, we have other, issues of unplanned development, illegal encroachment on riparian lands. Yeah. But really, it is an act of God.
Able to access the World Bank funding under FLOCA, which is
so under FLOCA. Just to answer that, it is true. Program. It is true that we are working on that. But that's no, it's not my docket. But just to say that indeed we have a competent authority that is responsible. You can't just have a minister for climate smart. Or climate change. Climate change is part of environment.
I think
we have a substantive chief minister in charge of that docket, including the FLOCA conversation. I know that I may not speak with authority, but I know that conversation has been ongoing, not just in the executive, but even in the assembly, to fast-track the process of putting in place the necessary legal requirements to access that fund, as is the case with many other counties.
No, in 2 counties.
Yes, only 2.
Yes.
Nairobi and Mombasa, and they have no excuse, because when you say there has been a process, how long do you need to wait to receive money?
Yeah.
When you hear, my money is here.
But we need the money. No, we have no reason not to want to have that money. money,
exactly,
Senator.
I'm surprised
so we are doing
because
everything.
there should not be an excuse.
We are doing everything amongst many other things.
I mean Nairobi.
Yes.
I mean Nairobi.
Simiyu just
But Nairobi
try
is
and
us.
listen, and try and listen and understand that, I mean, money should not just be lying, because you are complaining of late disbursement by the National Treasury, yet your money for Floka is lying. And you clearly, I like it because he acknowledges and understands that, yes, that money is there, but he says there's a process. A whole financial year, this is the second financial year. And what saddens me is because where we sit with Senator Eddie in finance, we have been approving and have been proudly speaking and say, this is what we have for Nairobi as far as climate. Yeah. And apparently, last week is when we realized this money has never moved. Why? Because somebody somewhere has not done the basic of just signing an agreement as far as the Floka conditions are concerned. Yet the other 45 counties have adhered. What is so special with Nairobi and Mombasa that they cannot adhere to this money so that they can come and be able to help the residents of Nairobi? Two, the issue of the act, the issue of the laws. He says that there are no laws. For Christ's sake, this is the beauty of the Kenyan parliamentary system. The beauty of the Kenyan law is that you just Google and you'll find every law, it is in place. That is what I've done. What we have here is Article 10 of the Nairobi City Disaster Management Act, which says, an emergency, sorry, which says 10, and let me say it slowly, where upon occurrence of a disaster, the council is satisfied that immediate procurement, the key word is immediate procurement of provisions or materials or the immediate application of resources are necessary for rescue or relief. The council may authorize the directorate to procure the provisions of the materials directly, their own act of Nairobi.
So let me say this.
Let me finish.
Let me finish. You said there's no law in Nairobi.
Yeah.
This is because what is coming out from the disaster management team is the worry of the audit. We will be asked, how did we give these particular mattresses? How did we give these particular blankets? It is simple. We sit in the audit as far as special funds are concerned. What is just needed through the auditors is just the documents that are needed. If you procured 1,000 blankets, just show these are the receipts that we. What is wrong with that? The other issue is that we also have under PFM Act that after every 3 months, okay, that is the timeline to be able to submit the reports. So if we are within the 3 months, by the time Senate is coming, even to ask you, it's over a year. And as we speak, we are in 2024 MACU. The audit reports that we are trying to wind up to do, I think we are in 2022, 2023. So that now we come to the current financial year. We are not even here. So what makes you delay response, yet you are guided by the same law, because that is why this is called an emergency fund. Okay. So there's no excuse,
Let me just say this, and maybe let me concede that we have the Disaster Management Act of 2015, which in many ways, let me admit, is very flawed. That is why we are going through an active process of repealing it and introducing a proper law. You know, you've alluded to a council. The council. Let me just finish. Let me finish. Yeah. Allow me to say, Eddie, I think, allow me to also... Eddie,
I want to caution you. I just want to help you.
Let him help him.
I'd be willing to repeat this in any other forum.
No, you usually come to my committee sometimes.
Yes.
And I want you to remain a leader the good leader that you have been.
Yes.
Never be on TV in a situation of disaster and there's an existing law that guides you to take some particular steps that is very clear as they are. And then you are saying you're prohibited because you're working on another law.
No, but and allow me to answer. But Eddie, that law I cannot even work. Listen, that act, Eddie, that act you're referring to does not even recognize the position of Chief Officer Disaster Management. Therefore, I have no role, yet I'm the Principal Accounting Officer. That act refers to a council, a Disaster Management Council, that's supposed to bring together leaders from the national government, police, which is not there.
No,
so even giving it effect, and I'm explaining to you.
That's what he's saying,
I'm explaining to you, it is not there. Therefore, giving effect to a law that is not effectable makes it defective. And that's why from as early last year...
Allow me to say, he's making a point.
That law that you're referring to, it's one of the things
that council is
not there. So if you continue reading that law, Senator Tabitha, nowhere does it mention the chief officer, who's the principal accounting officer in the disaster management sector. How do I run it? How do I give it effect? And that's why I've said just like Senator Eddie considered, that we need to review the entire legal and regulatory framework nationally and at the county level so that we have laws that are able to respond effectively and appropriately to disasters as they are. This has been part of a learning curve. One of the things as a sector we recognized at the beginning of this administration is that law was defective. And that's why we've gone through the process of public participation. We're actually going through the process of introducing a more responsive law that I said addresses three things. Number one, the leadership and organization of disaster management, recognizing that Nairobi is not a county affair, just disaster, particularly from a disaster management. We must create enough latitude to be able to incorporate all the critical stakeholders. Number two, coordination and control. That act does not even give us the room to be able to understand how do you work with the National Police, KDF, how do you have incident command control, how do we have the issue of, I keep on repeating, disaster financing. Disaster financing is a whole chapter in itself. We need to have a very serious discussion and ask ourselves, are the current provisions adequate for us to address, particularly natural disasters? We sit on the same belt with Turkey. God forbid, if an earthquake hit Nairobi, how do we address it? We must be able to look at how we have an act that gives us enough latitude to be able to invest in a proper disaster response unit. Okay. Let me finish this by saying this. At the moment, best practices prescribe that you need one firefighter for every 2,000 citizens. My current staff complement, you are about 300 to 400, meaning you are understaffed as it is as a county to respond to not just Nairobi problems, but the national problems that we respond to. Because you're also called upon to respond to Machakos, Kajiado, etc. Meaning we need about 3,000 firefighters. Meaning I need a budget that is not constrained from the same basket. My ideal situation is this. Disaster management needs to be semi-autonomous. Okay. Right? So that you're given the latitude to operate the way Nairobi Water operates. That you have, subject of course to the best practices in terms of financial management, but I have the flexibility to recruit independently, to train independently, to deploy resources independently without having to be held back.
That's a whole different conversation.
No, you're saying the ideal.
The ideal. No, that's what I say.
But Trevor, even now you're not agreeing.
What is frustrating me, Trevor, is that you are allowing the chief officer to actually be able to give a lot of excuses. Very, very intellectual.
No, Eddie, you cannot. I would say, I would also say, Eddie, you're hurling a lot of unsupported and unsubstantiated statements.
And that's why I'm growing impatient, because you're allowing the chief officer to get away with a lot of responsibility that is technically getting away from his responsibility and the county's responsibility. And the danger that I told you, Trevor, of discussing a disaster issue with the chief officer is because he will take this thing as his problem, his personal problem, and not his office, so that he will misguide the entire conversation.
That's not true.
You are saying that in the Act, there is no council.
Yes.
And because Tabitha read the Act in terms of Section 10 of the Act.
Yes.
Section 4, Part 2 of the Act. County disaster management structure. And I told you that the officer should know there is a difference between county laws and national laws.
Yeah.
This is a county council. It exists. There is established the Nairobi City Disaster and Emergency Management Council. The members of the council shall consist, number one, the deputy governor, who shall be the chairperson of the council. Is Nairobi not having a deputy governor?
It has.
It has. Number two, the county executive member responsible for public safety. What this phrase contemplated is any CEC that will be put that has got some function of public safety will be in that council. Does Nairobi have a CEC who is responsible for public safety?
Yes.
It does have.
No, it doesn't.
There is somebody who is in charge
the office of the governor.
Service.
The office of the governor.
Just wait. The county executive member responsible for treasury. Do we have a CEC responsible for treasury? There is. The county member responsible for health. Do we have a county member in Nairobi CEC responsible for health? There is. The county executive member responsible for environment. Do we have that in Nairobi? I can't list all of it.
I'd wish that. Please, because don't give partial information. Go ahead.
Okay. The county member responsible for culture and social services. The county executive member responsible for planning. The secretary to the Nairobi City County Public Service Board. The county commissioner. The county commandant of police. The county liaison officer of the Kenya Red Cross Society. You see, and at least 2 representatives of the public representing both gender duly appointed by the governor with approval from the county assembly.
So that has not.
But the thing is, there is an act that has given the executive leadership of Nairobi power and prescription to be able to set up that council. And that's why I'm telling you that that responsibility, I started by saying that responsibility doesn't lie with the gentleman that is sitting here. That responsibility lies with the governor, CEO of Nairobi. That if the council is not in place, you cannot blame it on him. Yes. But you cannot come here and tell the public that the council is non-existent. In law, in law,
there's a prescription for it, but it is not there.
It is there by law.
It is there by law.
Yes. So are you saying that the governor is sleeping on his job?
No, Trevor. Trevor, I wish maybe I should have invited. I should have invited the council. No, I need to respond to this.
No, you are skipping me. No, exactly. There's one thing that he brought out. He said he needs more budget. I don't know if you heard that.
Yes.
And why do you need more budget if the money that you have that is within you can't even spend it? You are complaining at the same time the money that is lying in national treasury. You don't want to access it. Why are you saying you need more budget for what?
So 2 things.
No, let us finish. Just a second. There is an act that is existing. Even as they amend and they say we want to amend, we are in 2024 for 2020, the current this particular, we have what is guiding them. So this council is in place, and I've heard when he got to point a person apart from the deputy governor, there's a member you said, then he disputed a member of the
public safety.
Public safety.
I am in charge. I'm the chief officer. It does not provide for me to sit in that caucus.
No, let me finish.
But that's why you're personalizing this problem.
I'm not personalizing it. I'm making it clear. No.
Let me finish. Let me finish because on that particular person of the person in charge of disaster, I think why Mr. Sifbiu is here, and he clearly agrees that he's the person in charge. So he has mandate to sit in this good council. He's guided and protected by law. The issues of finance, procurement, and those are under the docket of the CEC for finance. He's not the one to do the procurement directly unless he wants to be the one doing, but he's supposed to identify and give the report of these are the requirements, this is what you need in terms of numbers, quantities, and all that, those kind of things. Because with the CEC for finance, then he's able to issue and direct for funding, because also members of this committee of the fund are partly members of the finance, CC finance in the counties. So everything is in place. And the other day the governor had called in for a meeting. I believe these people were part of this particular meeting to be able to achieve. So the CEC, the director, misleading and says that since they don't have a law, and then in the next meeting says we have a law. We don't have enough budget. Money is lying still out there, not spent enough.
Thank you, Trevor. And I think for me, 2 things. Yeah, and I'd like to give me 2 minutes. I'd like to just respond to those 2 issues, but also to just maybe share my tips to the public on what to do, because you're in a crisis. And I think what would be useful in this conversation is what is it the public needs to do to move forward. Number 1, I invite my 2 colleagues to take things into perspective. Look at the disaster management bill that was drafted by, I think, Mheshimiwa Ichung'wah, and one done by Governors Mutula and Sakaja in I think around 2018, 2019, around this conversation. And there's been a critique on the disaster management laws that exist. And one of the critiques in terms of the prescription of the councils as prescribed was influenced by what you call the Mwongozo guideline that specifies and stipulates the number of people that can sit on a council that manages public funds. right? Particularly a fund such as the one contemplated in this particular discussion. If you read that list that you talked about, it was practically the entire executive, the 10, you're talking about 14, 15 people sitting in a council. Yet the Mwongozo guidelines issued by the national government clearly stipulate on the number and constitution. It says you cannot have more than 2 members from the executive guiding a fund such as like this. And it's for that reason that I mentioned that it could not be given effect. Secondly, it's correct to mention that you have a DG. But recall that between I think in the last administration, for a large chunk of time, Nairobi did not have a DG. Because this thing was 2018, talk about 2018 when the sector was created, the disaster management was created in 2018, not before then. Now we have a DG. And that's why I said, the process of repealing a law is not an overnight affair. We are going through the process, right? I'm saying this. That's number one. Number two,
very briefly.
Number two, the issue of budget. Why we need more money? You see, Senator, the department does not survive or rely on the emergency fund. We have clear programs that we need to run as a sector to do what Senator talked about: mitigation and prevention. We must build many more fire stations. Ideally, we have 6 now. We have 2 more. We have 2 more coming. These need to be budgeted for.
Okay.
We need to invest in fire engines.
Okay.
We need to invest in personnel. We need to invest in individuals. I say this on a light note, but I think it's now serious.
Okay.
We need to step up our water rescue capacity as a county.
Understood.
We don't have...
Gentlemen, thank you so much for
yes,
time. We've run out of time. Asante sana. No, there's no more time. We've run out of time completely. Asante sana for making time. That has been State of the Nation. Coming up next is Cooking Tips.